Okay, what's up? So this is part 3. In the first 2 parts, I covered the basics of the art of rhetoric, and last time I talked about logos, or the content of your message, and I urge you to write out your manuscript in full so you could fully think through on paper what you're going to say when you come into the pulpit. Now let's talk about the pathos. How do you deliver that with passion? And I'm going to recommend to you something that's going to make you very uncomfortable if you've never done this before, and that would be preaching memorator, or preaching from memory. All right, preaching from memory. Now let me tell you a little bit of a personal story first. I was terrified to do this as a beginning preacher. I wrote out my manuscripts, always have, but then I stuck fairly close to them, and I was constantly looking up and down to my audience, trying to make eye contact, but then again also trying to follow along my manuscript because I wanted to say things precisely just so as I had written them, get all my quotations right, and that sort of thing. What I figured out through trial and error is that you're actually using 2 different portions of your brain when you try to do that. You're using, first of all, that extemporaneous part of your brain that is gifted in speaking fluently and freely to others as you would in a conversation. You don't have to look at notes when you're having coffee with somebody, do you? Okay, so there's that part of the brain, but then there's also the other part of the brain that wants to read and be very rigorous in getting the words right. And what happens when you switch back and forth, you toggle back and forth between those 2 sections of the brain, is it actually doesn't come out very well. It's like trying to switch on 2 programs of your computer, let's say Word and PowerPoint, back and forth, very difficult to do. So here's what happened to me. I challenged myself a few years ago to try to memorize, that's right, to memorize the first page of my manuscript. Now I usually write 3 pages, about 2,500, 3,000 words, something like that, for every sermon, which is about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And I challenged myself, I'm going to come out and I'm going to at least give my introduction and try to get into point 1 of my sermon. And I was terrified to do this. And so what I did was I actually walked out in front of my pulpit, not behind it where I'd be tempted to look down at my notes, but I walked out in front of the pulpit so I couldn't look down at my notes. And in other words, I jumped out with no parachute. Okay, I had on a secondary parachute, let's say, because I could go back behind the pulpit and read again if I had to. But what I realized is that my ability to visualize my sermon on the page was far greater than I gave myself credit for. And so the very first week I actually tried this, forced myself to do it. What happens is I preached further in my manuscript than I thought I could go. In fact, out of a 3-page manuscript, I ended up doing the first 2 pages by memory, even though I had only thought I could do 1. So the next week, I was emboldened by this. And so the next week, I went back to the pulpit and I thought to myself, this time I'm just going to see how far I can go. I won't set a goal, I'll just go until I need my manuscript. I went out the second week and I preached the entire sermon without even looking down at my notes. How did I do it? Well, I didn't think I had the ability to do it. But what I realized is that there are certain manuscript writing techniques that I can employ that are actually going to help me visualize my sermon. I could see it when I'm out there preaching. And so what I really want to stress you to do in your manuscript preparation is that you make sure that you're writing blocks of thought in your paragraphs rather than individual lines of expression. There's the key difference. And so when I'm writing my manuscript, I make sure that each paragraph represent a separate and distinct thought. Okay? So as I'm memorizing my manuscript, which I'll talk about that later, I'm not memorizing word for word or line for line, but rather thought for thought. So I'm going with blocks of units of ideas in order rather than lines or sentences or words in order, something to that effect. So here's what I do with my manuscript. I write it all out during the week, and then Saturday night I spend as my special time to commit it to memory with my manuscript in my hand, 3 pages. I'm going to underline things, I'm going to highlight things, I'm going to draw pictures on my manuscript, anything I can do to get the ideas of the manuscript in order. And that way when I go out to preach it on the Lord's Day, what I find is I'm seeing it. It's almost like I've got like Google Glass opened up over here in my mind. I'm looking at my audience, I'm making eye contact with them, but I'm all seeing my manuscript in my mind, working through the ideas one by one. Now, do I ever go back behind the pulpit and read the manuscript. Only when I want to quote something directly, such as a C.S. Lewis quote or a Calvin quote or something like that. I'll do it in that case. Or if I want to go back and read the Bible, a paragraph or something like this. But what you'll find is that your pathos, that passion from the pulpit, is greatly enlarged, such that you're not bound to the manuscript as though you're hiding behind the desk or hiding behind your own notes in preparation. All right, so that's my experience with preaching Memorter. I would love to hear your comments about this if you've ever tried this before. If you're interested in seeing some of the sermons, just go to the Faith Evangelical Presbyterian Church page, and you can see sermon after sermon after sermon in which you'll watch me preach from Bible in hand. And it's going to look like I'm extemporaneous. As a matter of fact, I'm not. Here, real quick, let me do this. Here's what a typical sermon looks like for me. 3 pages, 1, 2, 3, basic points highlighted in yellow, and I will learn that by blocks of units of thoughts, paragraph at a time, and I will deliver it without any notes, except for when I want to quote something. And you too, I can almost guarantee it, you too have the ability to do that, but you do need to have the daring, boldness, and confidence to get out there and try it. All right? Well, I hope anything I said was helpful to you. Feel free to like, subscribe, and I would love for you to go over to the Faith Church page and watch some of that sermon content. Have a great day. Love you lots. Talk to you soon.